Well, speaking of our friend Matt, Josh, he was our bio for our next group, Oasis. What's the story? Morning Glory, the second Oasis album, and the second time we're covering Oasis. Matt was nice enough to share his bio, so I'm going to try to shotgun it together. But first, Josh, he did also share what he picked for our montage and pre-opener right here. So you want to share with the listeners?
Yep. In the montage, you heard Morning Glory, and now you're going to hear Don't Look Back in Anger.
So Sally can wait. She knows it's too late as we're walking on by. Her soul slides away, but don't look back in anger. I heard you say.
Gotcha. So Matt was nice enough to mention that this was the 59th best-selling album of all time.
Okay,
Josh,
great.
believe it or not, selling 22 million copies. So needless to say, Oasis, who is about to tour with
Yeah.
with both Gallagher brothers,
Right.
surprise, surprise.
And a North American tour is
That's what I'm
rumored
saying.
as well,
Yep.
right?
North
Yeah.
American tours, and Oasis. It's always very interesting. They were massively popular in Britain, but they as much consider themselves to be like an American band in some ways, because they were the rare '90s British band, right, that crossed over and was as big here as they were. Maybe not quite as big as they were in Britain, but they were pretty damn big here in a way that all of their peers in that Britpop genre, Blur, Pulp, and Suede, just were not along the
Yeah.
way.
They definitely were on
Something
the
that they are very proud of, by the way, and made a lot of mentions of over the years. But this album was released on October 2nd, 1995. Matt mentions that drummer Tony McCarroll was kicked out of the band and replaced by Alan White for this album. So between 1 and 2, that was their personnel change. So Alan Whitey is his nickname. That's very clever. Was the drummer. Paul Giggsy McGuigan was the bassist. Paul Bonehead Arthurs on rhythm guitar. And then, of course, the Gallagher brothers, Liam and Noel. Noel on lead guitar and backing vocals, and not just backing vocals. He sings famously. Yep. Don't Look Back in Anger as well. And Liam Gallagher vocals and tambourine as well. So actually, Noel sings 2 songs on this album. The album was recorded in 15 days at a pace of about 1 song a day. And the album's title, which is notable, was inspired by Noel's friend Melissa Lim, who answered the phone while talking with him with the phrase, "What's the story, Morning Glory?" which in turn derived from a line in the song The Telephone Hour from the film Bye Bye Birdie, which I find funny because referencing other source material is a key of the Oasis formula, I'd say, along the way.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the song Step Out bore such a close resemblance to the song Uptight, Everything's Alright by Stevie Wonder that it was removed from the album shortly before release due to the threat of legal action along the way. This would not be the first or last time that closeness to other songs sort of plagued the Gallagher brothers. And in fairness, they're not exactly apologetic for it either, pretty much saying like, yeah, but we have a different essence to what we do. For most people that know of Oasis, and I know you said earlier everybody knows about it, but I think there's plenty of people who are younger or older who may not know Oasis. But for those that do, they know that the friction between the Gallagher brothers is a constant, overwhelming factor within Oasis's band history. And the producer of this album, however, said, "The sessions for this album were the best, easiest, least fraught, and most happily creative time I've ever had in a recording studio."
Wow.
Josh. I believe people can feel and hear when music is dishonest and motivated by the wrong reasons. Morning Glory, for all its imperfection and flaws, is dripping with love and happiness. You may have noticed, and I definitely noticed on this album, that the production is very unique on this album. It was a mastering technique called brick wall mastering, and it's used throughout this album. It is. I have bitched about this on modern music to every friend that will listen to me about how loud modern music is, and I'm not talking like, oh, the kids are loud. I'm talking more like the mixes
Yeah.
are just designed to be loud. And this album, many journalists say, was the beginning of the brick wall master. I now have a term for what this is: brick wall mastering. That is there.
So
What
why
it
did-
is,
yeah.
what it is it's the heavy use of compression.
Okay.
Within the vocaling, so when we do our own mixing of this podcast, Josh, there's the ability to compress, right? And if you were to compress our sound, it would normalize it. But also, what ends up happening, in my opinion, is that when you do that, it pushes certain stuff to the front loud as hell. And it's something I have noticed. I think, unfortunately, starting to come into our world here as early as the mid-90s. I think I mentioned it a couple weeks ago, and Matt goes into quite a bit about it on here. And Owen Morris is sort of credited with that technique on Definitely Maybe, and really steps into it on this album. And I can say it is definitely noticeable. And for those that may be listening to modern production and who had listened to every album along the way with us, you might notice that this album sounds more modern, for better or worse, than any other album production-wise that we've covered right now. The record label decided to release Roll With It prior to the release of the album, 6 weeks ahead of it. That was not something that typically happened. It was usually 3 weeks ahead of it. And famously, it caused Blur to release their single back, and they released them at the same time. And it was that battle of Britpop that overseas was a big deal. Blur versus Oasis. That feud, Matt's got some things along here. I won't go too much into it, but famously, Noel spoke about the rivalry with Damon Albarn and Alex James from Blur, and was quoted in the September 17th edition of The Observer saying he hoped that the pair of them would catch AIDS and die because I fucking hate them too, was what he said. He later recanted this and worked with Damon Albarn later, but it was... I love how that was, but it caused controversy. You don't say right there. The record sold 345,000 copies in its first week, making it at the time the second fastest selling album in British history, behind only Michael Jackson's Bad. And Matt mentions that it's believed that some critics shifted to become Oasis partisans as opposed to Blur, who had kind of been thought of as the it band to sell more magazines when it became apparent that Oasis might have more critical sort of appeal. And Matt writes, famous, I don't know if you've ever seen it. I remember watching it live. It's hilarious. There's an MTV Unplugged at the Royal Festival Hall where Liam was not able to perform because he had a sore throat, and Noel had to sing the entire set. Did a very good job, but Liam did show up in the balcony with a pack of beer and cigarettes and heckled Noel in between while drunk, which he absolutely did do, and absolutely, I think, did it seriously too. So you never know with Oasis, but I'm pretty sure, based on when it was happening and Noel Gallagher's reaction, it was there.
Was it like a? Was it like a? Like awkward when watching it?
You just hear him in the background. It's one of those things where he's in the seat, like what I think of as like the Abraham Lincoln seat, you know what I mean? In like the balcony, like right over top of it, and Noel's just plowing through the sun. It's well worth checking out, Josh, if you haven't seen it, because it's pretty funny. And Matt does mention here, finding a replacement bassist took more time and effort. He had not mentioned before that they needed a replacement bassist, but we'll go with it. It says the band were rehearsing with David Potts, but he quickly resigned, and they brought in Andy Bell, formerly the guitarist and songwriter of Ride, as their new bassist. And Bell had never played bass before and had to learn to play it. Now, Matt does mention the bassist on this album was Paul McGuigan, so I'm guessing that after this album was released, he was...
Right.
Or before they toured, he was not there, and they brought in Andy Bell. But interesting, they'd pick the lead guitarist and songwriter of Ride, who sounds very little like Oasis, having covered them before. And he joins another in a long list of people who didn't know how to play the bass before playing it in the band. So there's still hope for me, Josh, in terms of learning how to play the bass. Okay. Matt says about this album, he says, listen, I know it's not original, and the band openly admits to ripping parts of songs off to make them their own, but I still love this album, which is, pretty much on cue for Matt right there. They branch out a bit by adding some more ballads, but the energy and melody is still dripping from every song. A personal favorite of the Britpop genre for me, and I never get sick of listening to this album. Big thumbs up. So Matt summarized it pretty succinctly there. Where do you fall on this one?
Yeah, I really like it. I still really like it. I'm surprised that, as many times as Wonderwall has been played throughout the years, listening to it this week, I still found it pretty appealing and effective. The same with Don't Look Back in Anger, which I've always really liked it. And the other singles on here, Roll With It, some might
Champagne
say.
Supernova.
Yeah, Champagne Supernova. They all still really work well. I was, as far as deeper cuts go, I thought She's Electric was really fun. As kind of one that's not talked about as much. I hadn't listened to this album in a long time. Probably, who knows when I last listened to it all the way through. But the guitar just still really works for me. Their energy, like Matt said, is there. I was trying to think about, like, it's interesting you brought up the kind of compression and altered production style. I was trying to think about how this compared to the first album, which I also really liked. I feel like the essence of Oasis is still there, but I'd have to go back and see. I feel like you're much better at picking up on the production stuff than I am. And so I'd be interested to see kind of what the difference is. That I definitely heard the Imagine sample or kind of homage and Don't Look Back in Anger this time. I also, after our conversation last time, really paid attention to the lyrics, and they are like nonsense. Like they're just like free.
That's Oasis's whole deal.
I know,
yes,
that's what you said, but like I couldn't get it out of my head. I was like, this is just like free association. Like you couldn't even like. There's no coherent like.
Yeah, Champagne Supernova is. It's who even knows what the hell that is?
Yeah. I think they try, with the Swamp Song versions 1 and 2, they try to go a little bluesy intentionally, but those are really just kind of like snippet transition interlude songs. But yeah, I agree with Matt. There really is kind of no bad songs on here. It's pretty concise. Even for being 50 minutes, it really moves. And it had me toe tapping the first time I listened to this week. I'll be honest, I was on a 14-mile hike, and it really got me through miles like 8 through 11, I think, or something like that. So
I do like the idea of thinking you listening to this song and then this album and then the Scott Walker album back to back on your hike.
I did not. I only listened to this and Mobb Deep on the hike because I was like, these are albums that I don't have to like overthink on. But yeah, it is interesting how Oasis crossed over so much more into the US. We talked about this before when we talked about Suede and Blur, and those albums, and I think all of us really liked both of them. Those as well. Pulp is coming up. That's the other one of the big four of Britpop. So we'll weigh in with that. But there's just something about Oasis that either their rock sensibility or the way they construct their songs or just the sound, it does have this mass appeal for me, even to this day. And I can see why, we talked about with Blur, how kind of they have a bit more Britishness to them, and their songs definitely more reminiscent of the Kinks and things like that. But Oasis is drawing on, I think, the more mass appeal parts of the Beatles, along with a million other artists. So it's a thumbs up for me. It's just kind of just a feel good album for me.
Yeah, I'll start with the obvious that this is a very listenable album. It's a lot of songs that are very catchy. You can't help but like it. And yeah, tons of singles that were on the radio all the time. 3 Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, and Champagne Supernova were on the radio constantly.
Yes.
Throughout the 90s. To this day, if you listen to alt rock radio, you'll hear those regularly. I have come to the conclusion that Oasis is the world's most enjoyable cover band, is how I describe them, because pretty much what they're doing is they're doing covers with just their version of it. And like I would say, Liam Gallagher has a great rock star voice and persona. I mean, the thing that Oasis kind of has is they're a cover band, but with unlike most cover bands that are not cool, you know what I mean? It's just they're clearly covered, but like they're one of the world's coolest bands, but
Yeah, they've
like
got
playing
that swagger.
covers basically.
Yep.
And that's why they are what they are. Having now listened to, you know, Blur and Suede and knowing what Pulp is, certainly in terms of chops and innovate, like it's not even close. Oasis is 4 of 4, but in terms of presence and star power and that essence that makes a band enjoyable to listen to, that's what Oasis has. And a lot of people will say, I don't know how that's what it is. To the American audience, the swagger was what drove them through. Suede had swagger up front with Brett Anderson, but it was British swagger. You know what I mean? It was a very British swagger. Blur sort of had a sensibility that made them more the Kinks, another band that struggled a little bit to get over.
Yep.
You know, they would have singles, but much like the Kinks, the singles that crossed over for Blur weren't always songs that were representative of, you know, who they were. You know, the Kinks had like Lola, right? And, you know, Blur had Song 2, and these weren't necessarily what you were listening to for it. And Pulp was always very British as well, right? And so, and Oasis is very British in that Liam Gallagher sings with a ridiculously British accent.
Yeah.
But that's really, in all honesty, outside of the fact that pretty much all of the covers they're doing are like a greatest hits of British artists. Like, yeah, Don't Look Back in Anger shamelessly rips off Imagine at the beginning, and it sounds like just basically a song that would be written by the Beatles. Hello, a song I really like, but that's a Kinks song for sure along the way. And you can pretty much line by line go through this album and find a British band of some renown who they're very close.
That we probably talked about.
And what I appreciate about them is that Oasis doesn't try to go up their own ass about this, which is why I let them slide on it. They pretty much are like, yeah, like there's a lot of bands we really like, you know, and why wouldn't we make songs that sound like them? Because that's the shit we want to listen to. And, you know, I also always have appreciated in this era where, as I've mentioned before, there are almost no cool people left in the world anymore. We're at like a deficit of traditionally cool people. Some people would say that's a good thing because they associate toxic, you know, with some of the elements of cool. But I do miss a little bit of people who were sort of cool and like a careening into chaos type of way at times. I think the only space we have for those people nowadays is like people in like computers and stuff, and they aren't cool. You know, they're chaotic, but I don't consider like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk cool. You know what I mean? For me, at least. Maybe if you're like an engineer. So I do like the fact that these guys were unrepentantly like, you know, rock stars, right?
Yeah.
And they sound like rock stars. And this album is just filled with big, bright hooks. I will say it definitely production-wise, before Matt even wrote that down, everything is shoved to the front of the mix on this. Like if you listen and you're looking for any nuance in terms of the stuff, like there isn't, because every piece of it is mixed to the front of there's no bass running in the background or vocals fading back. It's like the guitars are mixed first and they're right up front. And then the vocals are mixed next and they're right up front. And then the bass is mixed next and it's right up front. So when you play it loud, you have to play it loud in order to have any distinction between the pieces. This is the opposite of a headphones album in terms of it's designed to be played in... I think what people have mentioned and I feel is accurate, that like loudness mixes are designed to be played on shitty speakers, you know, and in public spaces, because the louder you play it, that's where you kind of get some distinctions between what's going on. But if you put the headphones on, it's like, you know, when you put headphones on, you're like, ooh, I noticed that thing and stuff. Like this mix, there's none of that. It's just what you hear listening to this over a TV or in a car or anything is exactly what you hear when you put on the headphones. It's not a bad thing necessarily, and it wasn't as big a deal for me in the 90s because there were a variety of production styles. So it was just a different choice. And so it's fine. It's like, this is what Oasis sounds like, right? Now, when everything is mixed this way, it's sort of like an unwelcome visitor from the ghost of production future. I'm not going to hold that against this album, though, because it was, it wasn't like homogenous at the time. It was a choice that was made to make them stand out. And in that sense, it works because their songs are just higher caliber songs than a lot of the stuff that's just loud along the way. So enjoyable, thumbs up. I totally get if you hate this album, why you hate it, because production-wise and derivative, if you are someone that values originality or something in the production, right, that welcomes additional, like if you listen to this album 12 times, it's going to be the exact same take you had the first time you listened to it. There isn't really anything to discover under it. That's not a bad thing, though, because the first time I listened to it, it's like, oh, this is an enjoyable album, and these guys know how to write a hook, right, and hook you in. My favorite song on this entire album is actually the first song, Hello. Is probably my favorite song on the entire album. But the singles are great, and they're sing-alongs, and they're designed to be played and sang, while you listen to them, and there's something to be said for that. So thumbs up, but I think it sounds like you, and definitely in Matt saying it, are seeing a little bit more of what I talked about second time around now. And that description of production, does it make a little bit more sense when I talk about loudness production, what it means?
It does, because now thinking back, like, you really can't hear the bass, and they also seem to use a lot of effects on like their vocals and stuff. Like there's echo and like kind of, I don't know, like fuzziness to it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're trying for like a retro feel to it. And then I think the only time you hear the drums is when they're like really pounding, like, and
as loud as possible. I
do kind of understand what you're saying now.
And once you hear it, Josh, you'll never be able to unhear it in like modern music.